Greetings and salutations, future diplomats. Welcome to our sixth class. Today we have our list number six, or exercise list number six. And this week I decided to go back to more international relations or international politics related subjects. Since last exercise list, we focused more on literature and linguistics aspects of the English language. We had a text about, if you remember, about poetry, and then a text about art. So this week we go back to politics. We go back to something which is more palatable for siyasati candidates. I would guess that this week's texts and exercises were a bit easier than last week's for some of you. And as some of you will recognize, both texts come already from this year's past exam. The first one was actually a summary exercise for the second phase, which I transformed it into a first phase true or false examination. And the second one I adapted a little bit as well from last year's TPS. The first one talking about the famous two megatrends that now are present in contemporary international relations, the growth of global networks, and the digital revolution. Both of these subjects were discussed in the text. And the second text talks a little bit more about the diplomatic career itself, which is a tendency of these past 3 years has been a tendency of the examining board to ask questions about, as I mentioned in previous classes, about the diplomatic career itself. Okay. All right. So without further ado, let's go here. Let's go back. Let me share the screen with you guys. Okay. Here we go. All right. So this is our list number 6. And here we go. As many of you, some of you already also did have to write the summary for the second phase last year, or in your second phase classes had to write the summary. So most of you are familiar with this text. This week I wanted to make it a bit easier, since last week was harder. So most of you will be already familiar with this text, which is about 80% of the way to do a reading interpretation exercise. So since you guys already know the text, you already knows which points are important and what the author was trying to say, and how to interpret it correctly. Okay. So I guess we're not going to have any problems with this exercise. Okay. So continuing on, as I was saying before, this text talks about two global trends in the rapidly changing international global context, and the two main megatrends that he points out, as you guys already know, most of you guys, I guess, is that global networks are increasing in importance, and also digital revolution is changing the way in which information flows, and in a way in which the multiple actors, the new actors in international relations, such as NGOs, local city governments, and other nation states which were not at the center of world power before, are now being able to interact in this more complex world where there's a flood of information, and people who didn't have a voice before now have, like these civil society movements such as Occupy Wall Street, and WikiLeaks, and all these other, and as greater movements such as the Arab Spring back in 2011 showed us. Okay, so these are the kind of transformations that the that the author is trying to show us that are happening right now in international relations, and all of that in the backdrop of a shifting political power center from the west to the east, to now China and Eastern Asia, most specifically. Okay, and also the role of cities, right? The role of cities and being the place where these interactions mostly happen, and the implications of that into information sharing and the creation of networks. Okay, so it's a fairly complex text, but the language is not too hard. For the level of CSD of the exam, the vocabulary is not hard at all, and also the subjects are not that unfamiliar to the candidate who's been at it for some time now. Okay, so let's moving on to the questions. Oops, sorry, it's quite a long text. These, by the way, would be over the limit on the amount of words that they would have in a TPS. Usually in a TPS, they will have maximum around 500 words, a single text, and most of them are around 200, 250 words. This one is around 1,000, so you won't have texts which are this long in the exam. But since we have less questions, I thought it would be more fruitful for you guys to have more reading time and read a longer text, at least at this moment, and do less questions, because in the GPS you have 9 and here you only have 5. Okay, so don't worry about the length of the text, because in the exam itself, in the TPS, you will not find texts which are this long. They're usually half as long as this one, and sometimes even a quarter as long as this one. Okay, so don't worry, because this text was made for the second phase in order for the candidate to write a proper summary of the text. Okay, so don't worry. Okay, and also usually read. The first thing you should do is read who the author is. Where is this from? What type? Is it an article, a publication, academic article? Is it a more journalistic article, or whatever? So the first information to look at is the footnote, as I always say in every class. Who wrote it, where's it from, and what's the title? Because sometimes the title gives you the thesis of the actual article. So it's easier to understand where the author is going and what his points of view will be. All right. Moving on. Question number 1. According to the text, decide whether the following statements are right or wrong. This is a very generic header here, so don't even have to take time to read it, just move on. There's no specific command, so very generalistic, very generic. Okay. Question number 1, item number 1. Let's go. A more informed public has made governments more prone. There's a few typos here, but don't worry. What I meant to say was a more informed public has made governments more prone to maintaining an open dialogue with civil society. Okay, so there's a preposition there missing. Prone to maintaining an open dialogue with civil society. Okay, there's a little typo there. Forgive my mistake. Okay, and this one is incorrect. Actually, what he says here in the text is that governments did not take the advantage that was brought by the digital revolution. The digital revolution made it possible for people who were otherwise not informed of what was happening outside their countries to be informed of what the government is saying to them, to counter what the government is saying to them with information that they get from outside of the country. So many times the government might have an official position about a certain issue, which is their view, and they don't get any antagonizing views. They only get the government official view. This was before, but now with the internet, with other means of communications brought on by the digital revolution, um, any person can get information from abroad and see what other news agencies are saying, what other points of view are, so it can be more informed about what the government is doing and what is propaganda and what is not. So the public is more savvy now. It's more difficult for governments to spew out propaganda as they were before. So in this case, what he criticizes, the author here, I think it's John, right? Excuse me, his name is Jonathan. What Jonathan is saying here, is that governments did not take that opportunity to have an open dialogue with their citizens. They're still trying, instead of doing that, they're still trying to use the digital revolution to maintain the public, to misinform the public and to maintain their own agendas. So instead of opening their dialogue, what they're doing is, like a few countries are accused of doing, they're sending misinformation through social networks. They're using media trolls, as they say, spewing out government propaganda as if it were real fact. So they're misinforming the public more, which is it's a big shame, according to the author. So a more informed public has not garnered that reaction from the governments. Governments are now, some governments, not all of them now, are actually trying to misinform the public even more. Okay, so it did not lead to an open dialogue. Okay, and as we're going to see afterwards, some even Western governments are not even using these new tools in their favor. They're actually reducing their budgets for communications and such, the use of digital platforms to inform the public. Okay, so for the author, it was a missed opportunity. Okay, moving on to item number 2. The advancements in information technologies have stifled governments' efforts to promote their agendas. And this one is correct. The word stifled means they impeded, they made it more difficult, and this is correct. So this is the other facet of his argument from item number 1, is that what I was saying, because of social networks and digital platforms, the public can by itself network with other peoples outside their countries, with companies, with individuals, with organizations that they couldn't before, and they can gather more information and also easily cooperate with other groups that they weren't possible before. And this circumvents somewhat the government's official propaganda, because before it was difficult. Before, you would only have the TV as the window to the world, for instance, and the government would be able to control completely the TV. It's not the same case now with social networks and the internet. It's a lot more difficult to control. Even when they try to control, people find new ways to circumvent these controls, like they use VPNs and other sorts of jamming devices, which jams government control, and they can still get information from outside and concert efforts with other groups, which are particularly not in favor of government's position. So yes, it did stifle the government's efforts. Governments being, as you look closely here, governments in the plural. So this is the possessive plural here, governments around the world, not just one. The efforts of many governments to promote their agendas, okay? So yes, the advancements in information technologies have stifled their efforts, okay? Cities provide fodder for new and increasingly intricate ways for non-government actors to share information. And this is also correct. He sees the roles of cities. He says it right here. Let me find the actual excerpt of the role of cities. which is quite interesting. Let me just find it here very quickly. Here we go. The third agent of transformation in the mass urbanization of is the mass urbanization of the world's population. Only in the last few years has human history reached the point where the majority of people around the world live in cities. As you know, since 2009 and 10, now, or even later, I don't know, around this decade was the first time in history where the urban population surpassed the rural population. All right, worldwide, of course. In countries like Brazil, it was a long time ago, and countries in Europe even more so, and North America as well. But worldwide, this last decade was the first decade where the majority of people are now urban. And okay, so this, according to him, will result in that this trend will continue with the proportion of urban dwellers rising over even higher, ever higher. Global urbanization has the implications of how information is shared, the diffusion of technology, cross-pollination of ideas, innovation, and the development of political movements. Okay. Moreover, cities themselves are becoming more assertive global actors in their own rights. This trend challenges the primacy of the nation state as the sole actor in international relations. Okay. And here, what cities help with is exactly this exchange of ideas. You have a lot of people living together, and a lot of different people from different backgrounds, different groups, and they have this instant access to other people, to other ways of thinking, which is something that in rural areas where they're apart from everybody else is difficult to get. But here, this physical proximity of different groups generates this environment where ideas are more easily shared and new ways of thinking happen. So living in cities is this perfect fuel or fodder for new ideas in this new rise of global networks. Okay, and as such, it gives the city much more power and relevance in international relations. Okay, here we go. Moving on. So this one is also correct. Okay. Item number 4. Given the growing competition among actors, global networks offer a means by which they can more easily manage their interactions. And this one is also correct. As you see along in the texts, there are now more actors, so there's more competitions for attention in international relations, if you will. Now it's not just a nation state, the sole representative, the sole actor, actually, in international relations. Now you have NGOs, you have cities, as we saw here before. You have civil society organizations. There's even have individuals and companies acting in international relations with power. And so now we have all these actors interacting, which you didn't have before. You create this, to quote Robert Cohen, you have this complex interdependence, if you will. And in this sense, you have to have networks of knowledge, networks of information, which gives you a proper channel in order to manage these interactions, because you have to have direction and focus in these interactions. If you don't, it's going to be a confusion of a competition among actors, which might not be beneficial for international relations. So the more you have these channels of communications and global networks, according to the author, the more easily manageable the interactions among them will be. Okay, so this one is correct. All right, so recapping question number 1, item number 1 correct, item number 2 wrong, and number 2 correct, number 3 correct, and number 4 also correct. Moving on to question 2. Based on the ideas expressed in the vocabulary of the text, of text 1, decide whether the following statements are right or wrong. So here they're asking slightly different questions. They're going to have intermixed a grammar question and a vocab question, and also questions about the ideas, which they were asking before anyway, so that doesn't change at all. Okay. So here we go. Number one is also now a reading interpretation question. And here, number one, let's read it. Governments' careless diffusion of information has led to the rise of powerful civil society movements such as the Arab Spring and the Occupy pressure groups. And here, this one is pretty correct, is the same thing I was saying. Sorry, excuse me, this one is incorrect. It's correct that the new diffusion of information has allowed for civil society movements such as the Arab Spring and the Occupy movement to become actors of international relations, but it wasn't because of government's careless diffusion of information which led to that. It was the digital revolution, it was new technologies. It wasn't because the government was carelessly diffusing information, publicizing information that he wasn't supposed to publicize, that these governments, that these movements were created. There's no causal relationship. He doesn't say anywhere in the text that the governments were carelessly diffusing information. Okay. Here there is missing a the as well. Okay. If you want to have the possessive here, but forget about this. Okay. Governments, many governments' careless diffusion, because there are many in the world, did not lead directly to the creation of these movements. Okay. So it's a comparison that is not logical in the context of this article. Okay. So you have to watch out again for these reading interpretation traps. They give you information that seems reasonable, but if you look logically, there's no causal relationship between one and the other. Okay, so this one is incorrect. All right, number two, the word whilst, written in bold, can be corrected, substituted by the word while, without affecting the meaning of the sentence. And this one is a strictly vocab question. And yes, you can interchange them. They are equivalent. You can change one for another. Whilst and while are used interchangeably without affecting the meaning. It's just that whilst may seem a bit more formal than while. And also whilst is used mostly in Great Britain and in British English. In the US, they would usually use while. But people in the US also use whilst when they want to sound more formal, but semantically they have the same value. They are equivalent. You can interchange one for the other, okay? So don't worry, if you see a whilst, you can change it for a while, okay? It depends on how formal you want to be in your writing, okay? But they are interchangeable. So number two, correct. Question two, item three. Here we go. The importance given to soft power in contemporary global affairs results in part from a shift in the traditional hierarchies in international relations. Okay. And this one is correct. This one, what saves here is the in part, because the importance given to soft power is the shift from the traditional hierarchies in international relations is one of the trends that he was talking about. Is part of the explanation, is not the whole explanation. So if this in part wasn't here, then it will be incorrect because this is not, there's also other causes which gives this new importance to soft power. It's not only the shift in traditional hierarchies in international relations. Right, you have more new actors, you have the digital revolution, you have other things that are happening as well. But yes, it's this is partly responsible for the new rise in soft power, the importance of soft power in contemporary global affairs. Okay, and also the name of the title of the article is "Why Does Soft Power Matter?" So by knowing the title alone, you would know, yeah, the author is giving importance to soft power. So for this one, you already would know this correct without even reading the text, just reading the title of the text. Okay, this, of course, for this part you would have to read. But from here on, you already know this is most likely correct. Okay, so it saves you a few seconds if you read the title beforehand. Okay. The use of the expression cross-pollination in bold type is a deliberate attempt by the author to include environmental issues in the discussion about the shifting global affairs landscape. So this one is incorrect. There's also, again, no causal relationship between the use of an expression and including environmental issues in the discussion. Cross-pollination is as an expression, of course, literally means when you cross-pollinate, use the pollen from one species of plant with another and try to mix into a new thing. Usually in English, we use this expression to in the context of when we were talking about exchanging ideas, and when we try to put different points of view together to create a new thing, to create something new, a new idea or a new policy or a new thing. We use cross-pollinate ideas. So of course he's using this in the metaphorical sense, and of course he's not mentioning at all environmental issues. Of course he might have his ideas about environmental issues, but it's not in this text. Okay, so one thing does not have to do with another. And sometimes they do have items like this where they try to use language from the text, like shifting global affairs landscape, something that seems like it belongs to the text, but they put something which they try to use expressions from the text in a way that they're not linked together, like this one, cross-pollination and environmental issues is not correct. So they try to trick you in thinking, oh, this seems right because it's using the language of the text, but the two ideas don't go along with each other, okay? The author is not attempting to include environmental issues in the discussion by using a metaphorical expression used for plants, okay? He's trying to give you that idea that in this new age of in the digital age of flowing information, of different ideas coming together, that something new might grow. Okay, new idea or something easier for new ideas to grow. Okay, so recapping question number 2. Item number 1, wrong. Item number 2, right. Item number 3, right. Item number 4, incorrect. Bearing in mind the megatrends discussed in text 1, judge right or wrong, okay? And this one, okay, gives you an even shorter, it's giving you an even shorter delimitation of the subject that they're going to be testing you on, only on the megatrends. But even sometimes when they have a heading like this, sometimes they say they're going to ask you just about megatrends, but they ask you a little bit more about the text more broadly. But the focus will be on megatrends in this case. So in this case, read the header here. Item number 1, global networks gave rise to the so-called digital revolution. And this one is incorrect. This one is just mixing in two megatrends and saying that one causes the other. But no, these two separately, or two separate megatrends, are the two megatrends that he's talking about in the text that shape up current international affairs. All right. So here, instead of the two being two separate megatrends here, what this item is saying that one is responsible for the other. This comparison is incorrect. Okay. So this one, no, is completely incorrect. Number 2, the decentralization of power among traditional international relations actors are part of a broader, there's a typo here as well, include an A there, if you will, by yourselves, is that correct? A broader change in global affairs, which by its turn increase the importance of global networks. And this is exactly what he's saying. And also here, pay very close attention to the word part. It's also a part. It's one of the reasons why global networks are more important these days. In this one, they get you one. This is one global trend, one part of the mega trend, and this is one. This is inside one mega trend, and what is responsible for that mega trend. And if you read the text, there are three. There are three reasons why global trends are gaining importance, and this is just one of them: the changing hierarchies, and also the multiplication of actors in international relations. Okay, and of course, since it's a part of a broader change, this is saying this is one part of other changes which are also happening, which contribute to global networks. So this one is correct. Is exactly what the author of the text is saying. Okay. Number 3, Western countries have decreased their spending on soft power related projects. Exactly. This is exactly what I was saying before. Instead of taking this opportunity in order to increase their soft power in a time where soft power is more important because of global networks and because of the digital revolution, Western countries are doing the opposite. They see soft power now as more superfluous, especially a few countries these days, Western countries, which shall remain nameless, and now they're decreasing their spending on soft power, which they should be doing the exact opposite. Since soft power is growing in importance, this is all according to the text, of course. They should be increasing and focusing on these soft power related projects, but they're doing the opposite. They're cutting spending. They are in a budget crunch, as it says in the text. They see it as superfluous, which is unfortunate, really. Okay, so this one is correct. This is a traditional comparison question for reading interpretation, where they give you a comparison which the author does not make, and you're not able to infer this from reading the text. So let's see. Governments do not use new digital tools as much as non-state actors. It says in the text that they don't use it the way they should, but there's no way for us to evaluate how much a government is using compared to non-state actors. So we don't know if the governments are using it as much or less or more as non-state actors. All we know is that they're using it in the wrong ways. As you see in the text. So this comparison, we can't make this comparison by reading the text. So this one is incorrect. Okay. All right. Now here, moving on to text number 2. This was a text from last year's exam. Okay. It's a much smaller text. And it talks about diplomacy and about the actual diplomatic career. And this is one of the texts that we've been getting in the exam since 2015 mostly. And it's a good change of pace for me because you're going to become a diplomat, so it's good to have text about the diplomatic career itself. As I always say, the CACD, I think, is the only exam where you don't actually talk about your profession, the profession that you're going to embark in. You study everything but diplomacy itself. Well, studied very superficially, and it's sometimes good to have text about the career itself and what diplomats think about the career. Okay. All right. So this one is a British diplomat. And about things that diplomats are famous for, which is the duplicity and the way they evade direct questions and answers, and about being too on the wall, sitting on the wall, and not having a definite position, just towing the company line, meaning doing everything what the government says. Okay. And also about old myths that we always have about diplomats being this glamorous field profession. All you do is drink champagnes and go to cocktails in expensive suits and stuff. But people still have that idea. Okay, so it's and also the problems of being a very male focused career, and something very still is not getting still with the times. It takes a long time for diplomacy to change, to get it to the modern times. All right, so this is it's a very fun text to read as well. Okay, so moving on here to question number 4. Decide whether the following statements are right or wrong according to the text. Again, a generic header, as they often like to do. Okay. Item number 1. It can be correctly inferred from the text that there are trends that there tends to be presently more female diplomats, as well as diplomats with more diverse backgrounds than in 1966. And this one is correct. If you just read this line over here. For centuries, diplomacy recruited from aristocracy and the upper class. When I joined, where was it? Before, I was circumscribed to the aristocracy and the upper classes, but now they draw. Today, the recruitment pool is vastly bigger in every way. So in every way, it's inferring that even here he was talking about how there are more men than women. Traditionally, there was more men than women. When he says here that the pool is vastly bigger in every way, he's inferring that in every way, meaning diverse cultural backgrounds, there are more females than there were before, now from different classes as well, they recruit. So naturally, you can infer that also women are now in increased numbers as they were compared to back then. It's not saying that it's mostly female, it's saying that it increased the numbers of females since the 1960s. Okay, so this one is correct. Item number 2, it can be correctly concluded from the text that the recruitment methods adopted in the past have fueled suspicions against diplomats and created a fallacious idea about their work. Of course, this is also correct. Since recruitment methods before, SERPs only recruited diplomats from aristocracy, from upper classes, and from specific universities. It created this idea that all diplomats do is go to expensive cocktails with expensive suits, and also deal with subject matters which are very elite, very aristocratic, and also and they're very vague about. They're not very hard in the criticisms of government positions and everything else. They're very on the fence about every issue. Okay, because of this very aristocratic recruitment pool that they had before, creating a suspicion about the profession. Okay. Item number 3, question 4. For the author, the bad reputation diplomacy holds has to do with the frequent international negotiations in which diplomats deal with foreign officials. And this one is incorrect. The bad reputation diplomacy gets, as it says in the item right straight above, is the extremely elitist recruitment policy that they had before, the elitist subject matters that they dealt with. This is what caused the bad reputation of diplomacy and diplomats. And also, yes, the idea that diplomats are always appeasers, that they always want to appease, and they never want to actually fight for their countries, which is a wrong idea. But this is the idea some people have about diplomacy. Okay, so it's not because of this; it's because of this antiquated view of diplomacy. Okay, so this one is incorrect. Number 4, the one mentioned in the first paragraph didn't expect the author to reveal his true opinions. Okay, what do you guys think? And this one was annulled. This one, the annula was annulled. They did not give a right or wrong answer to this one. And it's always very important to go into CESP's website. I'm going to do it now for you guys. Let's me go in. Taking a long time to load. It's always good to go into CESP's website and see the reasons why it was a no, the way they changed the answer key, because sometimes if people don't know the reason why they change, various conspiracy theories start growing, saying that, oh, that they have an idea that it's impossible to pass in this exam because the examining board changes their minds because they have this view of the thing when how can they put wrong for this one and annul that one? And if you don't know the reasons why, you're going to think up of new ideas. And this is where most of the conspiracy theories about the examining board are grown. So it's a good thing to go into such a website and see the exact reason why they changed the answer key for this particular question. If I can only find it because it's so complicated. It might be here somewhere. Oh, here we go. So it was question 35 here. I'm going to read it in English here. The expression two opinions used as synonymous as straight answers, it made it more difficult for you to judge the item, which is correct. True opinions is not the same as straight answers. Straight answers means the idea that you give direct answers. But direct answers do not necessarily mean that they have that they are the true opinions. So in this case, it had to be annulled because it's not synonymous with straight answers, which is said here in the text. All right. So it was a mistake on the examining board's part. Straight answers. Oh, I passed it. Here, actually given straight answers to the question. Straight answers are not the same as true opinions, okay, of the person. It means direct, objective answers, and that's not necessarily the true opinion of the person. It can be giving you objective, direct responses of a government position and not your true opinion. So they're not synonymous as the examining board used here. So it's annulled, okay. And last but not least, question number 5. The words clad and quaffing, both in bold, could be correctly replaced by dressed and sipping without this altering the meaning of the sentence, although this substitution would make the text less humorous. And this is incorrect. Clad, the word clad is correct. You can say he's clad in a specific kind of clothes. He's dressed in a specific kind of clothes. They are synonymous, but quaffing, no. Quaffing, no. Quaffing means you take large gulps of something, not a sip. A sip is when you take small sips, small sips of a drink. So it's very small amounts of a drink. It's a sip. And quaffing is the exact opposite. It's when you take a lot of something, when you're quaffing something. Okay, so they are not synonymous. They're actually antonymous. Okay. Also a vocab question. Item number 2. There will be no change in the meaning of the passage from often to duplicity, both in bold type, if they were replaced by even though it's often confused with espionage, which is its illegitimate cousin. Diplomacy has been linked with misbehavior and duplicity for centuries. Okay. So let's see the sentence here. Okay. The usual wishy-washy that you get from diplomats. Often confused with his its clandestine cousin, espionage, it has for centuries been associated with deviousness and duplicity, often confused with its clandestine cousin. And here they're always testing your vocab here for the word clandestine. And clandestine can be interpreted as illegitimate. So this one is correct. You can correctly change the word illegitimate for the word clandestine for illegitimate cousin. Okay, they have the same value. So this one is quite correct. Again, they were testing your vocabulary. Simpler than you think. 5, item number 3. The excerpt that you get from diplomats in bold type could be correctly replaced by which one gets from diplomats without changing the meaning of the sentence. That in which can be interchanged most of the time. So 99% of the time you can interchange them, so don't worry. And here, exact when to use the word one. One, he's using one in the generic sense. A person, one, or you. In this context, he's using you in the same context of a generic person. When you, but he's not actually talking about you. He's talking about you, a person in the generic sense, which is the same idea which one has here, a person in the generic sense. So that you can be the same depending on the context. In this context, yes, can be the same, has the same semantic value as which one. Talking about a generic person, okay? That one, a generic person gets from a diplomat, that people usually get from a diplomat. So which one gets from diplomats is the same thing. Okay, you just do the adjustments, like here the get turns into gets. Okay, so this one is correct. It can be interchanged. Ooh, sorry. Excuse me. All right, and last but not least, question 5, item number 4. The recruitment policy of the British diplomatic service was designated and planned by elite academics and university intellectuals. And this one is incorrect. He's confusing the recruitment pool of diplomats in Great Britain in the 1960s with elite academics and elite universities as being the ones who formulate foreign policy. And that's not the case. They used to get their recruits from elite universities and from the upper class, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they formulated the foreign policy. Okay, so this one is incorrect. Okay, so here recapping question number 5, we have item number 1 wrong, item number 2 right, item number 3 wrong, item number 4 wrong. Okay. All right. And okay. And thank you very much for your patience. This was our 6th exercise list. Next week we'll be back with our 7th list, and I will be expecting you then. Have a great week. Bye-bye.